Welcome everyone to the 2019 Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm very excited to have Grace Helms Kotre with us again. She was on our first summit, and she's going to be doing something really interesting today, which is a meditation and a demonstration for us. She is a certified mindfulness instructor, and she works with a whole range of people, from parents to schools and organizations, with her company Power to Be. She's given us a very nice downloadable checklist as well, which looks really great, that you can use to improve your own practice. So take a look at that in her speaker section. And I'm going to pass it over to Grace to introduce us to this session and tell us a little bit what it's about.
Thank you, Helen. It's really my pleasure to be here. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share about this topic. So the topic of my talk here is doing our own work and using mindfulness to challenge implicit bias. So what I'd like to do in our short time together is to do a brief meditation. We'll do a couple of brief meditations during our time. And then I'd like to go through a little bit about what bias is and how it comes up in us, how it presents in our lives, especially why it's important for us as early childhood caregivers or preschool teachers, our role with children, why that's especially important that we're doing our work in this area, and then to talk about specific ways that mindfulness and meditation can help for us to challenge bias. So that's kind of what I'd like to do today. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you to join me in a brief meditation just to get started. So if you would come into a mindful posture. So in whatever way you're sitting is okay, but just making sure that the spine is nice and tall, but not rigid. And the hands can be resting in the lap, wherever is comfortable. And if it feels good to let your eyes close, you can go ahead and do that. If it feels better to just soften the gaze, you're welcome to do that. And for a moment, just arriving in this place. Noticing how it feels to be sitting. Noticing the weight of the body against the chair. Feeling the pressure of the hands where they make contact with the legs. Just bringing some awareness into the body in this moment, helping ourselves to arrive fully, to ground in this place, in this body. And taking just a few mindful breaths, so a few breaths that we're aware of, that we're conscious of. Maybe it's the first time today you've been aware of your breath. And now I'll ask you to bring to mind some of the values that guide your work as a teacher or as a caregiver. Some of the values that you think are especially important in your work with children, the values that you bring to your classroom, or in any way that you're connecting with young children. What are some of the values that come to mind for you? Just letting those arise in your mind. Words that may come to mind, things like caring, kindness, love, equality, sharing, respect, or some examples. Really, whatever comes to mind for you. Just honoring that is something important that you bring to your work with children, a value you deeply believe in. And noticing how it feels to contemplate these values for a moment. Noticing where you feel it in your body. And when you're ready, just letting go of that contemplation and gently bringing your attention back up into the room, into the space you're in, letting the eyes open and just coming back into the outer world. So for me, one of the primary values that comes up when I consider my work with children is treating children with love and really bringing love into my relationships with children so that they can feel that they're loved, so that they can be inspired by that love, be made more courageous by that love, so that they can live to their full potential. And whatever words came to mind for you, just hold those in your mind. We'll revisit them at the end, but just stay connected on some level to those values that came up for you. So we all have values like this that guide our work. And sometimes, maybe often, with our values, we share them with our students well. So we talk the talk and we walk the walk, so to speak. So we're able to actually live our values in our daily interactions with children. But in some cases, we don't. In some cases, we're actually unconsciously undermining the things we believe in ourselves. So we may not be aware of it, but we have habits or tendencies that cause us to act or react in ways that actually don't align with our values. And this is true for every one of us. It's true for me. It's true for everyone. So this is important because our students are not affected only by what we're saying and doing consciously, like you need to share or you need to be kind. So those are important things to say, but they're also affected by what we're doing unconsciously, by our own habits. So if we say be kind, but we're not always acting kind, they'll pick up on that. So for example, I really value patience. I ask my own children to be patient with each other. You know, I talk about patience a lot, but I know that I have a deeply ingrained habit that sometimes is unconscious, that is impatience. So that's something that I can bring extra awareness to through my mindfulness practice so that I can actually try to more and more to live that value, to both advocate for patience and to live patience by acting with patience in my daily life. So in these kinds of cases, like for me with patience and for all of us in a variety of ways, we really need to do our own work. And this is really what I mean by doing our own work is that we need to commit to doing the difficult, sometimes difficult work of looking inside ourselves, bringing mindfulness to our habits that we may be more or less conscious of, and bringing awareness to them so that we can start to live more in line with our values, so that we can challenge those habits that undermine our values. And I give all of this as an introduction to what we're talking about today, which is bias. So one habit that all of us have been conditioned to have, even from our very early childhood, is bias. So just to explore bias a little bit here, bias refers to attitudes and judgments of others based on their social identities. Attitudes and judgments of others based on their social identities. Social identities are all the ways by which we identify socially. So it includes categories like race and class and gender, sexual orientation, religion, age, ability status, etc. All the categories by which we identify socially. So most of our bias, these judgments or attitudes of others, is actually implicit, meaning unconscious. Most of our bias is something that exists beneath the surface inside of us, so that we don't actually set out to act with discrimination toward anyone. Most of us really do try to live the value of treating people with respect and kindness, regardless of their social identity. But that unconscious part of us is still biased, and that bias has formed along throughout our lives. We'll talk about that in a minute. So this affects our behavior. It affects our behavior in the classroom. It affects our behavior beyond the classroom, or in any way that we work with children, or in any way we relate to other people. Bias is affecting our behavior. If it's not examined, if we don't practice doing our own work with bias, it is affecting other people through us. And that's hard to swallow because sometimes we might want to resist a truth like that. It's taken me a long time to wrap my head around it and come to acceptance of that. But it's a really important thing for us to contemplate and to work with in our lives. When we become aware of our implicit bias, so making what is unconscious conscious, then we can actually act in greater accordance with our values, like we were talking about at the beginning, right? And mindfulness is a really powerful tool for developing this awareness. So that's what we're going to talk about in more depth today. I just want to do a little bit of background on implicit bias, where it comes from, because I think it's good for us to understand all the ways that the seeds of bias have been planted in us, even though it has not been intentional on our part at all, right? So again, we all have implicit bias. We develop implicit biases in early childhood, and there have been research studies that have shown that even at age 6 months, infants even, are aware of differences in social categories, and that by preschool age, by age 3, children are already playing out power dynamics based on race and gender. So the studies on this are kind of incredible to look at, that even that young, certainly, without any conscious attempt at being educated to be biased, children already are acting out bias with others. And on the resource sheet that Helen alluded to, the Mindfulness of Bias checklist that you have access to, there's some information about the studies there in the Children Are Not Colorblind article, if you want to check that out. So even if we value equality and we're taking steps to celebrate diversity in the classroom, that's a big thing. And it's wonderful that we're doing that. A lot of classrooms focus lessons on celebrating diversity, the differences among us, what makes us the same and different, and that's great work to do. Even if we're consciously doing that, bias is still affecting our behavior. So we are unconsciously, and studies have shown this as well, that teachers, caregivers unconsciously treat children differently based on their social identities. Again, whether or not we're aware of this. And this is a hard one to swallow as well, our bias is contagious. So children are picking up on our nonverbal cues. Our unconscious bias is coming out of us in our nonverbal cues even. And they're using those cues to form their own implicit biases. And there's a good research study on this called Catching Social Bias by Skinner and some other researchers in 2016, if you want to look that up. So one more thing to explore with bias before we move on to, well, what do we do about it? Is this question of, does bias affect everyone evenly? If everybody has bias, then is everybody, experiencing the effects of bias evenly? And the answer is no. So it is true that our biases tend to favor the groups that we're already a part of, the social in-groups that we're a part of. So the groups people that we're usually surrounded by, we tend to favor those folks. And then our biases tend to reject people that we don't come into contact with regularly. So it's true that there is some subjective dimension to bias in which identities we are more favorable toward and those that we reject. But beyond that, there are these societal and cultural dynamics that privilege certain identities and oppress others. And so we internalize this systemic kind of undercurrent of bias, again, from a very early age on an unconscious level. So for example, in the US society, people who are favored are those who are white, those who are men, those who have money, those who are educated, those who are not disabled, those who are Christian, those who are young, etc. Those social identities tend to be favored in the US society. And I'm sure there are others in other countries that we could identify. So the effects of bias are not distributed evenly. folks who don't fall into those favorable categories are often more harmed by bias. So bias disproportionately harms those who have these oppressed identities, these non-privileged identities. And why this matters is that especially, so first of all, it matters just that we're aware of these kind of systemic issues, that issues of injustice, right? But beyond that, it's really important for us to know this, especially if we hold ourselves identities of privilege in our own societies. For myself as a white person, a person who identifies as white in the US, it's really important for me to challenge my own bias, because with privilege comes power. Whether or not I'm aware of it, my being white gives me a lot of power in the US culture. So my bias actually has more power to do harm toward those who don't have that same kind of identity, privileged identities. So I bring that up because it's important for me to name that as a reality, that our own social identities matter in how harmful our bias can be. So when we're acting with bias unconsciously toward children that we serve, and we have some identities of privilege, it's even more important for us to do our own inner work. And I consider myself in that category. So why do I want to bring this topic up in the Preschool Mindfulness Summit? I'm bringing it here because it's a passion of mine, and because I believe it's particularly important for us as early childhood educators. As I stated earlier, kids pick up bias from a very early age. So, infancy and preschool years, they're developing bias, right? So kids are picking up cues from broader social norms. They're picking up cues toward bias from things like TV and books and media that they interact with, and from the adults that they're interacting with on a regular basis. So as early childhood educators, or as preschool educators or caregivers, we are role models for the students. We are really important central leaders in their little lives. And so what we are doing unconsciously with bias really matters, right? So again, as much as we may consciously embrace diversity and really feel committed to that, our deeply conditioned biases are still affecting our behavior and even indirectly teaching our kids to be biased. That's why I feel like it's important to bring it up. So what can we do about it? It's an important question. What do we do with this information then? And in my experience and from the research, we see that mindfulness is a really useful tool for challenging bias. So how do we do that? How do we apply mindfulness here? So just to revisit the definition of mindfulness that I like to use is that mindfulness is paying attention to what's happening right now with an attitude of kind-heartedness or openness, right? And mindfulness can help us to challenge bias in a few specific ways. First of all, mindfulness actually makes us more self-aware in general. And that self-awareness lends itself to helping us to be more conscious of things like bias, more conscious of things that were previously unconscious or habitual, right? Secondly, mindfulness can actually improve our self-control and our adaptability, and there are studies that show this, making us more capable of challenging old habits, right? If we have greater self-control and we're more adaptable, we can challenge those old habits. And thirdly, research has begun to reveal, this is exciting research, that mindfulness, even a brief mindfulness meditation period, can actually reduce the brain's negative associations that cause implicit bias. Even a brief meditation period can start to shift our brain's patterns around bias. And the studies that I've seen about this have shown that mindfulness can decrease bias related to race, class, and age. And more research needs to be done in that area. I'm excited and looking forward to seeing what comes of that. So I'd like to share a handful of steps, just this list of 5 steps that you have access to on the Mindfulness of Bias checklist, for ways that we can bring mindfulness into our lives to help us to really live our values rather than have our actions dictated by these, unconscious habits, including bias. So here's the checklist, just to go through these briefly. You have them at your fingertips already in the resource sheet. So the first thing we can do is meditate. And that seems kind of, not even connected to bias, and that's okay. Just meditation on its own, without even considering bias, can help us to be less biased. So if you don't already have an existing meditation practice, just starting a meditation practice, trying to meditate daily, even for a few minutes a day, can be really helpful. And if you do have a practice, staying committed to that, continuing on with your meditation practice regularly. If you find it difficult to do that or difficult to start, there are some great apps that make that easier. You could join a class, or you could join a group in your area, or even online, to encourage your practice. The second thing we can do is to be more mindful of our own inner experience. And for this, I use a tool called the triangle of awareness. So the triangle refers to these three interrelated aspects of our experience, which are thoughts, emotions, and body sensations. And they're constantly shifting and changing within us. So when we bring more awareness to those things happening, oh, there's a thought, now I'm thinking about this thing. Oh, there's an emotion, I can feel that experience of an emotional reaction in my body. Oh, there's that body sensation related to that thought or to that emotion. We're more aware of the interplay of these aspects of our experience, and we're more in touch with what's going on with ourselves. That allows us to be more choiceful or more intentional about how we are acting. So just in general, being more aware of what's going on inside of ourselves, our own internal experience, can make us more skillful in how we're acting. And then the third step is directly applying that to bias. So noticing that triangle of awareness, thoughts, emotions, and body sensations that come up when we encounter someone with a different social identity than our own. So this may be at the grocery store, or it may be in the classroom with a student or a parent. This may be someone that you even are encountering passively, like someone who's on TV or social media. And you notice a reaction comes up for you around that person. Most of the time, this is unconscious. But if we bring awareness to that inner experience and we notice a thought arise, oh, there's a stereotype coming to mind when I encounter this person with a different identity. Oh, there's a judgment, right? Those are some thoughts that may come up. There may be an emotional reaction, like a little bit of tension or discomfort or anxiety around someone from a different social identity group. Noticing that. Noticing body sensations. Maybe there's a shift in posture or body language. Maybe there's a little bit of a muscle tension that shows up, maybe in the belly or the arms, the hands. Maybe the facial expression shifts a little. So just bringing awareness to those kinds of aspects of our experience related to bias helps us to then see how bias is showing up. That awareness alone starts to change the way that we are conditioned to act based on bias. That awareness alone. When I notice that there's a stereotype coming to mind, I can investigate that. I can say, well, is that true? How do I know that's true? Where did that even come from? I can investigate it a little bit. I'm not going to act based on that stereotype now because I'm aware that it's come up and it's a stereotype, right? So that awareness can change our behavior in direct ways. This is a difficult process. It takes time. Every time that you become aware of bias, that's a small victory. Seeing the bias itself can be hard because it's challenging to acknowledge that we have bias within ourselves. Some shame, some guilt, that kind of stuff can come up. Staying committed to this is the practice. That's the work. Seeing and seeing again is what starts to shift our deeply conditioned habits. The fourth step here is just to self-educate. Learn more about social identities, your own, if you're not that educated about your own social identity groups, and those of others. And I made a list of resources on that Mindfulness of Bias checklist. If you're interested in checking those out, it's one place to start. There are lots of ways to do this, but just setting that intention to start investigating and learning more about social identities can help to break down bias too. And doing so mindfully, with awareness of what's coming up when you're doing that. And then the fifth suggestion I have on this checklist is just to be to remind ourselves to be compassionate with ourselves. So we can't do this work without self-compassion. And I've actually tried. it's not successful. When we become critical of ourselves, harsh, judgmental with ourselves, as we see bias arise or as we start to interact with this work, it can quickly lead to apathy and despair. It can shut us down before we've even gotten started. So what we do when we bring mindfulness to bias is we really focus on that aspect of the definition of mindfulness, which is bringing that kind-hearted awareness or openness to everything that we're encountering. Bias, again, is not something that we've chosen to have in us, right? It's not our fault. It is our responsibility. So if you notice shame or guilt or some other kind of difficult emotion coming up, acknowledge that, make friends with that. I see you there, shame. You're trying to get the best of me, right? And be aware of that and continue on. That stuff's going to come up, and we treat ourselves with love and compassion, just like we would want to treat a child, right? Okay, so just to bring this to a close, I'd like to ask you one more time to join me in a short meditation. So if you would return to your mindful posture, whatever's comfortable for you is fine. And the spine is nice and tall, and the hands can be resting wherever is comfortable, in the lap or wherever. And you can let the eyes close, or you can just lower the gaze. And again, just bringing full attention into the body, to the experience of being here in this moment. Noticing if there's any emotional residue from this talk, or if there's any body sensations that you notice have shifted since you've been listening. Just being aware of that, acknowledging it, saying hello to whatever is there in the moment. And now bringing to mind again those values that came to mind in the first meditation, and revisiting them, bringing them back. Maybe it was one word, maybe it was 2 or 3 words. Acknowledging those values, acknowledging the passion and the love that you have for this work that you do in working with children and serving children, and the goodness that comes through you in all the ways that you share your values with them, in all the ways that you live these values. Just noticing how that feels to acknowledge that you're really doing a good job, that these values are important things to bring into the lives of children. And now, if you will, setting the intention with me to add to this list of values that we are also going to commit to doing our work around bias so that we can truly treat children with a loving equality, empowering them to be their best in every way. Noticing how it feels to set that intention to doing your own work, doing our own work together, making what is unconscious conscious, bringing more awareness to bias and how it comes through us in our everyday interactions. And now returning your attention to the body in the chair and the cushion, wherever you're sitting. Just noticing your body sensations again. When you're ready to let your eyes slowly open, or bringing your attention back up into the room, to the outer world. So my pleasure to get to share my thoughts about this with you. For me, it's an honor to have the opportunity. I'm grateful to you, Helen.
Thank you. That was really beautiful. It really touched my heart. A wonderful experience that we got to try. And I think this is such an important topic. And as you said, not much. We don't get much training as early childhood teachers on thinking about these things. And I love how you've brought mindfulness and the work on bias together to give us something really to dive into and to explore and think about. I also just wanted to say I think it's the part about self-compassion is so important, because I think we can very easily not be aware and then be aware and then feel like we've done something wrong, or
Yes.
we're not a good person, or things like that. So I love that is a step in the process.
Mm.
As you say, we all have these things inside of us, don't we? And sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know. And so are you training preschool teachers in this? Is this something that you go to schools and share with teachers or parents?
Yes, to some extent. I'm doing more of it now. I have been writing about it more for various audiences, and I have done created a couple of things, workshops and presentations around this topic. So, right, for teachers, I mean, for really any population, but I feel as a person who works with young children and has young children of my own, it feels even like this population, for us to explore this is maybe the most critical in terms of passing this on or stopping it, ending it, in some way, or challenging it from being spread on and through our children.
I mean, yes, if we're practicing it, that is going to influence the children in
Right.
the classroom to not pick up those things that we all have. So
Right.
yeah, very important work, I think, because you do see bias coming out in all different ways with young children. It's sometimes
Yes.
very surprising, where you think, oh, where did that come from? But yeah, I think we have to look at ourselves, and this seems like a really very good way to get that awareness, first of all, and then to to try and think about our actions and our behaviors and how those are playing out in the classroom. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Grace, for sharing that with us. It was an amazing exercise. You've given us lots of references in your PDF sheet, so I'll be checking all those out as well. And please visit Grace's website at mindfulpowertobe.com. We'll have the link on there. She's got lots of information, or if you wanted to contact her, you can reach her through there and see all the amazing things she's doing with young children and mindfulness. So thank you again, Grace. Thanks for being on the summit.